Hello, everyone, and welcome to a live edition of the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast. It's so great to be here with you.
Yeah, it's good to be here with you too, Kevin. I wish the times weren't so dark.
Yeah, I do as well. I wish that and unfortunately, they're getting darker. And I suppose we should start off. We need to check in with each other. I think all of us are going through an isolating time, and we want to know that everyone's out there and we're all caring for each other. And I should ask, how many times this past week did you feel like you had the coronavirus?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I haven't had any symptoms, but I mean, as we talked about last week, I recently traveled. It'll be 2 weeks on Monday. So like every day that goes by, I'm like checking my temperature a ridiculous amount of times. Anytime I cough, which everybody coughs a couple times here and there, it's normal, or sneeze, or feel a tickle in my throat, I'm like, holy shit, do I have it? And now, they're saying that people who have it, a lot of times, they're reporting losing their sense of taste and smell. And so I will wake up in the middle of the night and I'll smell the pillow and I'll smell my hair, cause I have a really strong, not a strong, but I have a scent to my shampoo. And I'm like, okay, thank God. And I can go back to sleep. But I imagine a lot of people are dealing with that. Also dealing with just washing your hands more. I've washed my hands more than I ever have in my entire life in the last month. Disinfecting or immediately taking it out of the packaging. Just things we never had to think about before. Consuming a lot more time throughout the day, wiping my phone off at least twice a day. And yeah, it's psychologically, anybody who's got OCD, I'm sure this is driving them nuts. I can't even imagine, because I think a lot of us are now thinking if we weren't OCD before, maybe we are now because of this.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect to it. There's the other aspect of on top of thinking maybe you have it. I have mentioned this on the show before. I'm staying with my sister right now, and she's a physician. Her husband is an ER doctor. So there's that fear too. The hospitals where I live in Northern Virginia haven't really been overwhelmed yet, but I'm sure at some point they will be, everywhere else. And once that happens, he's going to be exposed to this. Despite being in the richest county in the country, his hospitals, like every other hospital in the country, is running low on protective equipment. So he's having to reuse his mask as everybody else is, and they don't know how much longer they're going to have all the protective equipment. So I have this new fear of oh my God, maybe he's going to get me sick. Maybe he's going to get sick. I don't want anything bad to happen to him. And I'm watching him and a lot of other, doctor relatives and friends I have having to make crazy decisions. And I know there's a couple people, there's someone who left a comment. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but what's happening to doctors right now, I think it's really important to understand for a lot of us who are able to be at home and work from home and are lucky enough to have not, been laid off and are able to just make this work. It's today was a gorgeous day outside. It didn't look like anything was wrong. And it's really easy to think that and believe that when you're not sick. But hospitals right now, especially in zones like New York City, are war zones. They are war zones. And the people who are on the front lines, who are your combat soldiers in this war against a really deadly virus, are being completely neglected and abandoned by our government and are being forced to make crazy decisions, maybe not staying at home so they don't infect their families in case they become infected, and having to decide, okay, I guess I'm going to be a hero and I'm going to sacrifice my health to take care of people, even though I don't have protective equipment. And I mean, this is really serious. You've got health workers across the country getting sick and sometimes dying. There's a nurse in New York City that just died. In a hospital, she was working in a hospital where they're using trash bags as gowns. You've got New York doctors saying this is a third world country. And I don't say that lightly. I know people can find that somewhat offensive, but look, America is supposedly the richest fucking country in the world. Why on earth are doctors working without protective gear against a virus that nobody has immunity to? And it's this can lead to such a catastrophe too, because even if you're somebody who like, it's because there's some people who just have a hard time empathizing, right? So even if you're someone who's like, well, it's not my problem, I'm not a doctor. If you get sick and all the doctors are sick and the nurses are sick, there's no one to take care of you. Like, there's no one to take care of you. Like, if the doctors and nurses, if enough of them get sick and cannot work, like, we're fucked. Your health system collapses in a way you could have never imagined. And in a country where they're not really doing that much to contain this virus, like America is one of a handful of countries who's like not in lockdown right now. Like in parts of our country, things are just like, you know, these very vague guidelines, like, you know, restaurants and bars can stay open if they only have 10 people or less. You know, these guidelines, there's nobody to enforce that. In a lot of parts of the country, things are normal. Everyone's still leaving their house because no one's telling them not to, or they're not taking it seriously because they're being told by our officials that it's a flu. So in a country that's not really doing enough or that much to actually minimize the spread of this, like having doctors and nurses not have protective gear is even more catastrophic. And it's going to raise the mortality rate, because when you think about, I'll let you talk in a second. I know I've been ranting, but I just, all these things on my mind. But when you think about the mortality rate of this that we're hearing, it's different in different places, oftentimes because we don't actually know how many people have it. But one thing that's clear is that in places where the hospitals don't become overwhelmed, more people can survive because they can access the machines they need to fucking breathe. Like, this is a serious virus. Like 5% of people who get it need to be on a ventilator. That's a lot of people. So if you're talking, if we don't have enough hospital staff or ventilators for that matter, but hospital staff who can actually work that equipment, more people are going to die when it could have been. Recently read that like a lot of hospitals are coming up with these do not resuscitate blanket blanket policies because they can't waste their protective gear trying to resuscitate people who are going to get them sick and they have other patients to care for. Like, that's a disaster. We've already reached a disaster and this hasn't even peaked yet. Go ahead, Kevin. Sorry.
Well, yeah. Well, I think the thing that I would add to it, all of those are important opening remarks, and I wanted to, so everyone knows how the live show is going to run. I wanted to begin with some of our thoughts about what's been happening in the past week. We did a show last week, and we talked about many of these issues, but like everybody is experiencing this rapid intensification of these crises, and we've had so much happen in the last week. There are just so many things that every day it seems like there is a level of intensity that gets added on here. And what you're talking about is the exponential growth of this crisis and the impact from having so many hundreds more cases, from having the fact that the deaths are just skyrocketing throughout the country as well as throughout other parts of the world. And I think in addition to the healthcare workers, what is underappreciated are the everyday workers that are on these front lines who are making these sacrifices. Because, absolutely, we see now that there are sanitation workers that are walking away who don't really want to put themselves at risk. They want greater protections. We're reading horror stories from Amazon facilities where people are not being protected. Amazon's gone to they came up with their own 3-foot distancing rule instead of the 6-foot distancing rule. I don't know if you saw that, Rania, but they're making up their own safety precautions, even in the face of not really being able to accommodate, because they have hundreds, if not thousands of people in some of these facilities working and shipments. And so, you can't really do, they actually had to forego security just because standing in line to go through security is a risk of spreading the virus. You've got these facilities that have had cases of the virus and they haven't shut down. You've got basically workers all over. In these grocery stores, you could potentially be at risk. I saw stories about Costco's where people feel like they haven't been protected. And you have places where you actually aren't able to work from home, and people who are your bosses are still enforcing you coming to work, even though you could have some risk. And so those workers are on the front line. They're basically emergency workers at this point. people who are making these food deliveries, people who are involved in all of this. They're at this moment, I feel they're not the most crucial. The most crucial are the nurses and the doctors that are going to be saving lives, but they're definitely up there as people who need our support.
If anything, what this virus has definitely demonstrated is the people who are like the most essential to making things function who often end up being the people who are paid the least, such as grocery store workers, such as like waste management people, the people who collect your garbage, your mailman, the people who are still working throughout this to make things function while people who can work from home are so essential and should be paid like 10 times how much they are paid. And we can talk a little bit too about this crazy corporate bailout that both parties just passed, which is so insane. I mean, $1,200, like for somebody who just lost their job, can they pay their rent with $1,200? And they're saying for some people, it's going to take up to 4 months to get that payment if they don't have direct deposit set up with the IRS. And furthermore, you have to have had a 2018 or 2019 tax filing. And the other thing is, anybody who makes under $75,000 a year qualifies. And as you make more, you qualify less and less and less until you like make too much to get it. But the thing is, there's people who've lost their jobs a week ago. Let's say I made $90,000. So let's say I have a family of 5, and I made $90,000 a year ago, or until last week. I made $90,000. I have a family of 5 that I support, which is a lot of money depending on where I live, especially if I live in like a city. What the fuck is $1,200 going to do for me? First of all, second of all, I can't even get $1,200. So like, this is such bullshit legislation. And it's like, it just everything wrong with America is being illuminated right now by this virus, including the fact that we have a corporate ownership class that is disgusting and sociopathic and is using this crisis to steal money from us, to literally steal money from people, while the rest of us are given little tiny crumbs so that we can maybe go on a grocery store. So maybe we can still go buy groceries if we lost our jobs. I mean, it's just so fucking outrageous. And like Democrats were getting all this praise for like inserting, certain provisions about unemployment insurance, which was good. But like, you guys should have stood up harder against this. This is an insane bill that literally siphons off hundreds of billions of dollars to like the airline industry, to Boeing, which is like a dying fucking company because their plane kept crashing last year, is now being bailed out because of a virus. Like,
Boeing should be on trial. Boeing should be on trial.
And moreover, the companies, the big corporations that are receiving money as a result of this, they're only required that there's a provision that for the first 6 months after this legislation, they can only lay off 10% of their workers. But after that, there's no provision. Like after 6 months, they can take this money, lay off 10% of their workers, and then in 6 months, lay the rest of them off and keep all this money. Yeah. It's so outrageous. So unbelievably outrageous. And then there's small businesses that are supposed to be being helped, but I don't know how much they're going to be helped, which is going to be catastrophic because a high percentage of Americans work for small businesses. And those are the ones that are going to be hurt the hardest because they can't afford to keep their payroll going because they kind of go month to month, small businesses usually. So either way, like all of us who aren't 0.1 percenters are getting fucked by this bill.
But think about it. We've seen the 2-tiered system before us because Nancy Pelosi allowed for the loopholes in one of the earlier packages where it didn't protect people by giving paid family and sick leave to all of them. It didn't cover corporations like Amazon. It only applied to smaller businesses. It only applied to any place that has 500 or less employees. And then again, that's what we're seeing here with this coronavirus package here, though, that you're going to have a package where you're going to have $4 trillion. Actually, it's a $2 trillion package, but there's also $4 trillion that they're just using. The Treasury is injecting this money into corporations that's available to fill their balance sheets, to basically change their bank accounts so that they have more money to use. It's what they're doing. It's liquidity. It's like free money. And then yet what you're seeing is that like there's unemployment insurance that was expanded for people at the bottom. But again, like this bill is, it's like what you're saying there, where people, the layoffs thing is more stringent towards small businesses than it is for corporations. Small business, yep. Like let's say your local pizzeria that is actually having trouble because it has a tight budget, may actually have to lay off people because they really can't pay their bills. They're the ones that would get penalized. They're the ones that get demonized by this bill. It's Amazon and Walmart and these bigger companies and Boeing and United Airlines and all of these different...
A bunch of cruise ships. I don't think cruise ships should be allowed, by the way. I'm anti-cruise. I've always been anti-cruise. And now I've been vindicated. My opinion on cruises has been vindicated.
It's within good reason, I think. I mean, what they're just, it's just a way for a bunch of upper class people to waste their money, and I mean, ultimately they all just end up getting sick, right? And then there's because cruises are in international water, there's like a high number of crime that happens on cruises. Like people can get away because they don't know how to prosecute them because it's international waters. So like people often end up dying like mysteriously on cruises, or like there's like rapes and assaults that happen on cruises and like nobody ever gets prosecuted. But anyway, you were saying about this bill, this outrageous bill. Yeah, no, I mean, we're gonna get to comments here. We've actually got some new ones.
I just want to before we get to comments, I just want to make
one thing. Go ahead, but I did have one thing that I wanted to speak to, which was a dilemma. But go ahead. The people who are watching our show love your rants, and I don't want to get in your way.
You're free.
Oh, am I back?
Well, I just wanted to say, most industrialized countries have passed legislation to do things like fund the pay of workers up to 70 to 75% until this is over. That is what a country that can afford to do that should do. And it's just like Denmark's doing that, Ireland's doing that, the UK is doing more than we are, and they've got Boris Johnson in charge.
Yeah.
So like, I'm so shocked because, and the reason these countries are doing this is because they realize that even if they're pro-austerity, countries like Germany have been so pro-austerity, they realize in this situation, if after it's over, you want a society and an economy to come back to, you need to do this to like save capitalism. American capitalists, American ruling elites are so short-sighted and stupid. They don't even have a sense of self-preservation. They don't even have a sense of like, you need to do this now in order to save the system that enriches you. They don't even have that much sense. Like, and so what I'm becoming fearful of is that they're so stupid that what this is going to lead to is some sort of like societal breakdown where like if you have an unemployment rate, they're projecting 30-40%. If you have an unemployment rate where that many people are unemployed and the government isn't doing enough to keep those people fed and housed during a fucking pandemic, you're going to have people taking their guns out and like robbing each other. People are gonna start eating each other. That's what happens. People don't think it can happen in the US because they think we're a civilized country. That shit can happen anywhere. So I mean, I am worried about that. That's something that's on my mind. Anyways, make the point that you wanted to make, and then we can get to the
one thing I wanted to speak to, because I think that we've talked about it a lot, and I just wanted to highlight this dilemma very quickly, is that while it's admirable what Bernie Sanders did to save the unemployment insurance, to basically enforce the compromise that was agreed upon by the Democrats and Republicans, because I mean, not only are we talking about the sociopathy of corporations, but we're talking about the sociopathy of Republicans who had managed to get Democrats to back some of the worst corporate items that you could have imagined, include them in there, a bailout that rivaled, and in fact, people would argue might even be worse than what happened during the economic crash, just because we haven't seen the complete and total collapse of financial institutions. And yet they come out and we hear from Lindsey Graham, oh, actually, it's wrong if a nurse might make $24 an hour. Oh, it's wrong. We're giving too much money. Actually, the unemployment benefits might lead somebody to not want to go back to work, which is a totally absurd thing to suggest. It shows how out of touch you are and how you have no understanding of what working people are going through. And yet it was said about to blow that up when they were about to actually decimate the only part of this bill that is defensible, like one of the only parts of this bill that is defensible, which is it's actually a carbon copy of what Bernie Sanders had proposed. It's the one thing that he managed to get into this compromise legislation. And I would argue that if that hadn't been there, Bernie would have been the one sole vote against it because, and we can debate whether, it was right for him to vote for it or not. I think the larger point that needs to be made is one that he was making, which is that this system is such bullshit that you can't pass a bill that doesn't just cater to the capitalist interests. I mean, he said it out loud in his live stream. I heard him. He was like, I don't see how with Donald Trump and this administration, you got Steve Mnuchin, that snake at the Treasury Department, leaning over to go through to get it so it was prohibiting any of this money. I mean, they had to fight for that. That wasn't there initially. The Trump properties were going to be able to have access to these loans. And then, so finally, and like at the last hour, they were removing language related to how these businesses could use the money. We didn't have the final text of the bill when it was voted on. It's absolute insanity. And I think the biggest point is that, like, you can't pass progressive legislation in this country. You just can't, because there's so much corporate capture of our politicians and our government. And, and you can complain.
Kevin,
what?
One of the reasons, like, it's just what you're saying, that the Defense Production Act, that one of the reasons Trump has hesitated to use it in order to make medical equipment and protective gear for healthcare workers is because the Chamber of Commerce is lobbying against it. That's one of the reasons. Like, corporations in the Chamber of Commerce are lobbying against it. Like, if there's no better proof that our government is run by a bunch of rich executives, that there's no better proof than the fact that that is determining whether or not we can force industry to make medical masks. Like, these people are sociopaths. Like, they don't seem to realize. Go ahead.
Well, and also I say, fuck every single business or corporation that lined up and tried to jam something in this bill that had absolutely nothing to do with this crisis. We want you to know that Amazon asked for billions for their private space travel program. That's what Jeff Bezos asked. In the middle of this crisis, the Mars candy bar family asked for like $500 million. For what? For what did they want this fucking money? I don't know, but Bernie Sanders was telling us all that there was pork, that there was literal pork added in to the bill that had nothing to do with the crisis, that people
shock doctrine.
Yeah, lining up, taking advantage. I don't know if it's in there now.
Capitalism.
And I would argue that after this passed, nobody in the Senate knows what they just approved, because they only know the main planks. They don't know what was tucked in it. We will learn in the coming weeks what was jammed.
I mean, it's probably like 1,000 pages long and just full of weird stipulations that this or that lobbyist got put in through the whatever congressperson they have bought and paid for. I mean, we live in a disgusting, like, our government is disgusting. I've never been, we cover U.S. empire and U.S. war and all these things so much on this show. And I have to say, I've never been more disgusted with my government than I am right now, watching them bicker and like bail out corporations and let doctors die while the country like fails. I feel like we're a failed state. We have the highest number of confirmed coronavirus cases in the world, more than China now. And that's an underestimate. Like, that's an underestimate of how many we actually have, because we're barely testing. We don't actually know how widespread it is. It's probably double or triple that number. Like, I don't think people, except for people who work in the healthcare industry or have been reading about it obsessively like we have, or like watch the news all day because it's their job, I don't think most people understand the gravity of how serious this is and how many people are going to die. Like, and I'm not trying to be alarmist and scare people, but you should be scared. This is really, really, really catastrophic. It's catastrophic for the world. It's especially catastrophic for our country because of how our government is choosing to handle it or not handle it. And I think that this is like one of those moments where I would say that, and it's hard, like, I don't like saying this, but almost anybody else being in charge right now would do a better job handling this. That said, as catastrophic as Trump is in charge right now, that said, this also points to some serious systemic failures in our country's healthcare system. In our country overall, the fact that you have so many homeless people being like, what the fuck am I going to do? You have homeless kids who can't get food now because schools are closed. Rightly so. Schools should be closed. But we shouldn't have homeless kids who now can't get food. It's like the prison population is getting infected. All of the things that are wrong with our country are like joining together to create a mega catastrophe.
Yeah, true.
Anyway, we should probably start responding.
We should get to some comments. So we started about 5 or 10 minutes late, so we'll probably run a little bit 5 or 10 over. And I wanted to get to all of these comments and include people because we really wanted to do this for patrons as a show of solidarity. We appreciate your support. So we put this out to patrons first and encourage them to participate. And we've got several who are watching the broadcast. And then, of course, it's going to be available to everyone to listen to eventually. And we thank you for your continued support. We know that these are times that are uncertain. There's a lot. The crisis is something that is hugely taxing and leads to a lot of frustration and anxiety. So we thank all of you who can continue your support into April and beyond and help us continue to do the show. So that's it. I'll start with Des. And Rania, you have some of these. So if you want to read any of these during the broadcast, we could bring you in to read some of the comments. But we're pulling these from Patreon first. And then I've got a few here that are available on the dashboard that have come in from people who were just tuned in to the show. We'll mention a few of those too before we wrap. But this comes from Des. And Des says, hey, Rania and Kevin, thank you for putting out content and being there for patrons through this time. For me personally, I'm crying a lot today because my son's father and I have decided that since I work in a hospital, which has had several confirmed COVID-19 cases, it's probably safer to have him stay with his dad and grandmother until the worst of this passes, and who knows when that will be. At least we'll be able to text each other and FaceTime, but I'm heartbroken by this and learning of the first COVID-19 death in my county. I'm in Washington State, by the way. A friend of mine just said their brother's test came back positive, and he is in the city next to mine and works in a nursing home. Overall, this is just a really dark time that is heavily underscoring the injustice inherent within capitalism. So while I'm scared and sad, I'm also really hoping this is the darkness before a revolutionary dawn. However, I'm also infuriated by the racism we're seeing with people referring to COVID-19 as the China virus or the Wuhan virus. Would you please touch on this part of the subject? Thank you again and stay safe. P.S. March 26th is my birthday. If I see my next birthday in 2021, I'm really hoping it will be exponentially better. And because it's a lighter topic, I will take it because my birthday was on March 10th, and that was like the day before all the shit just started to like roll downhill. And it's universally agreed among people who are in my family that we should all get a do-over. If you have a March birthday, we all really should be able to just jump this month and go back through it again because it's been one awful, awful month. But to Dez's really crucial and important question, I'll put it up here, that we really need to talk about this racism that's been going around. I'm sure that you have some thoughts about this, Rania.
I do, but I also want to first say happy late birthday to you, Kevin, and happy birthday to Des. I'm sorry your birthday is falling in such a shitty time of the year. My nephew's birthday was 2 days ago, was March 24th, and he was turning 10, and he was really devastated we couldn't have like a party for him.
Yeah,
we just had to do like a FaceTime sing along, even though we all live in the same county. And that's really heartbreaking that you've decided to you have to stay away from your husband and child. I can't imagine that's an easy decision. And I know a lot of healthcare workers are having to make that kind of decision, and it's not fair. You shouldn't have to make that decision. I'm sure when you signed up to be a doctor or a nurse or whatever position that you have at the hospital, I'm sure you weren't signing up to risk your life. And I will say, some of my own relatives who are doctors have said to me, like, if I can't get, if they don't give me a mask, I will walk. I'm not going to work. I don't want to be a hero. I have kids to take care of. And I understand that. I understand that sentiment. I don't think we should have to demand or expect that the people who work in hospitals should have to risk their lives if they're not given the protective equipment. It's like a labor issue. So anyways, I think that, like, I've never in my life had more respect for healthcare workers than I do right now.
Agree.
And like, we feel for you. I'm so sorry that it's not fair. It's fucked up. As for the racism,
well, and some people making the choice to have to stay at the hospital and be there like almost the entire like day and day.
Or some people are getting hotel rooms. I mean, depending on how bad the outbreak is, they know they're being exposed to it, and that's why doctors and nurses and healthcare workers are getting so sick, because they're being repeatedly exposed to it over and over. And I want to point out that in China, what they did was really smart. Wuhan, when it was like 500 infections and like 50 dead or something like that, or maybe less than 50 dead, that's when they locked down Wuhan, like locked it down, like hard, shelter in place, no one can leave, enforced, to try and contain the virus. And then what they did is they had doctors from the rest of the country, which had like lighter versions of a lockdown because they weren't the infection rate wasn't so high. They sent 40,000 doctors from other parts of the country to Wuhan. And while a lot of doctors initially got infected, the majority, I believe, I was reading in the New York Times, like those 40,000 doctors who were sent there were given all the proper protective equipment they needed, given rooms to take off the equipment when they were done with their shifts, and gowns, like masks and like face shields, because when people are being intubated, they spit on you. And none of them got infected. And I'm looking at that and I'm like, wow, I can't imagine our country being able to do that, because we're not controlling anything. But anyway, about the racism aspect of it, it's really horrifying. The idea of calling it the China virus or the Wuhan virus, it has such a detrimental impact on the way Asians get treated as a result. And it's really just a way for our government and our inept government officials like Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo to deflect blame for their lack of action for 3 months on this issue. It's their fault this is happening in the US. You can blame China all you want for being the place where it originated, okay? But we have known about this since January, and nobody took it seriously, not in Europe and not in America. And now Europe is starting to take it seriously, and so they'll eventually get it contained, but America still is not taking it seriously. And that is the fault of our government, our institutions, and that's the only reason they're using this language. They're using it for geopolitical purposes as well, because, the ongoing Cold War with China, but it's also to deflect blame. And that's what this administration is trying to do. They don't want to be blamed. And I mean, there's a lot of blame to go around. It's not just that this administration or Republicans, like Andrew Cuomo has become this hero overnight. And I understand why, because, compared to Trump, he's this more reasonable voice that's speaking frankly about what's happening. But 2 weeks ago, he wasn't taking it seriously either. He refused to close schools 2 weeks ago. He was like, kids, why do we need to close schools? Kids aren't passing it around. Like, just making stupid comments like that weren't based in reality. So this isn't a failure on every institutional level imaginable, across the board. And so that's why you're going to see, I think, this propaganda about China ramp up even more as a result. Because the U.S., as we noticed from the 2016 election, when nobody wanted to take responsibility for Trump getting elected, U.S. elites will go out of their way to deflect blame and blame whatever else they can, that in a way that that benefits their ideology and their view of the world.
Well, I think you have to focus on the positive, which is no matter what the officials in the Trump White House say, no matter what you hear on CNN. I mean, one thing that Jake Tapper is constantly doing whenever he talks about China, and it's annoying as shit, is he's like, well, we have to know that whatever is coming from the Chinese government it may be a lie. They don't always tell the truth. This is like his.
I'm like America. I'm like America because we always tell the truth.
But the thing that we need to focus on is no matter what we say that is just ignorant, the scientists are paying close attention to what China did. They're paying close attention because they know, and medical professionals are paying close attention. They know that what was done is useful and could possibly be applied to where they work at their hospital. And they are taking these the same way that they have learned from South Korea, the same way we've heard that there were things that were learned from Taiwan, things that they're learning that went wrong in Italy that they don't want to do, things that worked in the crisis when it was escalating that Italian doctors were doing that now we're going to have to do here. They're going to be taking that. So just the same, I think it's really dark and sad that in a moment when there should be solidarity across the world, that you would let the imperialism of the country just get to, I mean, the same way that you see capitalism undermine our response, you have imperialism filter down and undermine the response. And
on that note, I think it's important to state that I think this is a moment that's really, really going to change the balance of power in the world, especially as far as perception goes. Because if you look at the US and China, which are locked in this, new battle for who's going to be the superpower, and for, the US is like all about domination, you see what China's doing. China is sending aid all over the world. And by the way, China, if you're watching, please send us aid. We need it. China is sending aid all over the world, to Italy, to the UK, to various parts of Europe, all across Africa. You've got like this Chinese billionaire just donating protective equipment. That's a really big deal. What's the US doing? The US is ramping up its sanctions on Iran, which has been one of the hardest hit places, that already had its medical sector devastated by US sanctions and caused many shortages. You have the US ramping up sanctions on Venezuela and going even beyond that, where we can talk about a little bit more about that too, about what they've done to Venezuela, where today you have the US announcing that this $15 million, what's it called? Ransom, right? No, not ransom. What's
they're bounties.
Prize bounty. Thank you. A $15 million bounty for the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, who they're calling like a narco trafficker, which isn't even true. In fact, the narco traffickers in Latin America happen to be America's allies. Anyway, it's just like completely outrageous. And then you've got the US telling the world, the State Department literally warning the world not to accept help from Cuban doctors. You've got Cuba, a country that's also being sanctioned by the US, doing what it always does when there's a global health emergency or any health emergency anywhere, which is sending out these brigades of doctors, which they sent to Italy, which desperately needs them, and was like praising Cuba for this. And also Cuba, I believe, is helping the UK as well. And the US response to that is to warn the world not to accept life-saving help. I mean, I think when we come out of this, you're going to see the US in a much weaker position geopolitically, and everyone knows it. And with a completely diminished image across the world. Like if there was a significant chunk of the world that watches Hollywood films and sees the US as this ideal place that they want to be like and want to live in. That's an image that really does exist. And that is being proven to be a complete lie right now. Like a complete lie. Anybody who had that view of the US right now is like, fuck off, where's China? And including governments, by the way. Including governments. So and Russia as well. Russia's been sending aid to Italy, and Russia's being sanctioned by the EU. Russia's under sanction by the EU. And despite that, is still sending aid to an EU country. Like, this is going to dramatically shift the global power balance. So if there's any light at the end of the tunnel, that might be it, is that it'll weaken US imperialism to some degree. That said, a week ago, Mike Pompeo was debating whether we should maybe use this opportunity to bomb Iran. So who knows what crazy shit our psycho overlords are going to do to try and distract from coronavirus. I don't know if we could actually handle an invasion of anything right now because we have an immediate emergency inside the country. But like, you never know with these people. They're psychotic.
Yeah. Yeah, and we don't know if there's something after issuing these bounties against, the leaders of Venezuela. We have no idea. Let's get to another comment
Sorry,
here.
I'm being distracted by my
No, it's
niece.
cool. I'm going to roll to
You're not
comments.
even she's coming, she's awake.
Hey. All right. So
Yeah, I
Ronnie,
do.
one of
Sorry.
our patrons here, has shared with us that Ronnie came down with the virus back on Friday. Been saying for several weeks that the open plan office I work in should have closed. Outside Southeast Asia countries are waiting 4 weeks too late to lock down to prevent health services being overwhelmed. I believe Ronnie is in the UK, or at least in Europe, because he said he was going to tune in at 1 a.m. to watch this. So that's about the time difference.
I made the cake.
And,
No, I don't eat it. No,
and so
I'll eat it when I'm done.
Ronnie says that testing has been very weak in the UK, still not tested 100,000. This is the amount of tests South Korea was doing each and every day weeks ago. Government's not following the World Health Organization's advice to test. Let's get to George. We'll do one more here before we comment on some of these.
Okay, sorry. I'm trying to digest that this person has been diagnosed with corona or does not.
No, yeah. Test. I have the virus, Ronnie said.
Okay.
Ronnie shared. Didn't suggest that they were doing poorly, so that's a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, definitely clear here that Ronnie does not feel like proper precautions were taken. I mean, he kind of feels like Germany and Denmark have taken some good steps, but in the UK, we know. I mean, we talked about this on our show the past week, and it's been said over and over just how horrid the response was from the UK government to basically let this virus, and Boris Johnson openly spoke about, we want people to get infected. We're going to build herd immunity. It was so, I mean,
such a psycho. Like,
I mean, Donald Trump didn't even say that because he doesn't even understand that concept. But like, okay, let's get to George. So George is a patron and says thank you to both Rania and me for all that we're doing. Sincerely appreciated. My best wishes to the previous posters. The next comment is to thank Rania specifically for sharing her experience with hypochondria. This is a first for me, and although I feel good physically, I find myself checking how I am feeling constantly, especially now that one of my fellow employees is sick. I find that takes my attention, and I know part of being healthy is feeling good. I am being mindful, yet as always, finding balance is everything. My coworker has not been tested, by the way. My natural aberration is OCD. I feel like this is exactly what I've been trained for my entire life. I'm now doing everyone in the world by going nuts with the bleach, just nuts, round peg into round hole. We don't know yet, but that's because testing here in Israel is lapsing and it's exploding. So he's in Israel, and he says that the religious communities.
Yeah, he's in the northern Galilee, he says. Yeah.
Okay, they refuse the meeting cap rule for weeks and are spreading it at all the synagogues. Next comment, Israelis are terrible listeners and they do not like to be told what to do. Most Israelis with whom I've spoken are paying attention to their television and not independent news.
Yeah, I think that probably is something that Israelis share with Americans. Americans have this very individualistic culture where like no one can tell me what to do. Like if you tell me not to go to the beach, I'm going to bring my whole family. That's like a very personal freedom kind of thing. Maybe that's a little bit different with Israelis, but it's a little similar as well.
Settler colonialism.
Also, he had a second comment, where he's talking about Jordan and Lebanon are locked down, and we know it's exploding in Egypt and likely Syria, where do they even have testing equipment? There's some tests happening in Syria, not many. It's going to be a disaster in Syria because the Syria used to have a very strong healthcare system, but the U.S. war on Syria has destroyed that. And now it's much weaker, and definitely they don't have the necessary equipment they need to deal with some of the worst cases. I think what's important to understand, by the way, Ronnie, I'm so sorry you have this, but if it's any if you're watching, if it's any consolation, I know it's probably super scary. I know if I had it, I'd be really scared because you don't know how your body's going to react to it. And you're probably reading the most horrible stories about like people dying from it, especially even healthy people dying from it. But if it's any consolation, like a lot of the stories that we are hearing are the worst case scenarios. 80% of people who get this will be, it's not, obviously it's like not just the cold or, or just the flu. It's like a 2-week long experience of being sick, but most people will be okay and they'll recover on their own. I mean, everyone's scared of being the 20%, but even among the 20% that aren't the 80%, the majority of those people will be fine. 15% of them will just need to go to the hospital and get oxygen to help because they'll probably get pneumonia. And then it's the other 5% that become critical. And those 5% tend to be like older people, and which isn't okay. I mean, it's not like that makes it okay, but if it's just, you're probably going to be okay.
What Rania's
probably
saying
going to be okay.
is
Kevin's probably going to be okay. The majority of us who get this will likely be okay. My sister was explaining this to me too, and it helped me. So I'm just saying it because it might help you because you have it. Is with this issue, a lot of us might be mistaking the threat to society as a threat to our personal selves, but actually with COVID-19, the bigger threat isn't necessarily on a personal level, it's on a societal level, because it's overwhelming the hospitals, right? Because it's making all of these older people really severely sick because it's spreading and we don't know how to stop it. These are like, and because it's crashing economies, right? This is the stuff that we're reading in the news that's making us scared for ourselves getting sick, maybe more than we should be, is what I'm saying. So I think you'll be okay.
That's very serious, but if I could insert a couple moments of lightness here, hopefully, Ronnie, you will be Prince Charles. And we all know that Prince Charles is probably not going to die from the coronavirus.
How old is he, actually? Isn't he? He's like 50 or something?
He's in his 70s, I think.
Prince Charles is 70?
Yeah, I think he's 70.
Shit.
And also, the threat is not on a personal level. The threat is that Rand Paul might be in your community spreading coronavirus in your local gym. Oh, man. What an idiot. And
then
and I agree that's something Mike Sarvis raised. So I was seeing his comment.
Do you want me to read another one?
Yeah, go for it. We've got a few more here. I see you want to read Robert's here.
Hold on, I'm trying to find it. Robert.
Or sorry, do you have the one from Giorgio? On that I sent to you on WhatsApp. From Giorgio. Do you want to read?
Yeah. Oh, I have it. Okay, I'll read that one. Yeah. Looking forward to tonight's show. Hope you're watching. Hello, if you are. I'm very worried about the situations in Yemen and Gaza in terms of COVID-19. Needless to say, life was hell in both Yemen and Gaza prior to this global pandemic. But it is extremely disturbing to think about how coronavirus is making everything far worse. Any opinions, information you two could share about COVID-19 in relation to Yemen and or Gaza would be very valuable. So I'm not sure if it's in Yemen yet. It probably is. I'm just assuming at this point it's in every country. I do know it's in Gaza, which is very, very troubling because, as we know, Gaza has been Gaza's healthcare sector, along with the rest of the city, has been decimated by periodic Israeli campaigns of terror over the last 2 decades, as well as being under an extreme blockade that limits the amount of medical equipment and medicines that can get into the country. So it's really scary that it's in Gaza. I don't know how they're going to deal with it. Israel doesn't seem prepared to lift any restrictions. In fact, we've seen that Israel is still carrying out its occupation as it was before, and being extra vicious. I saw like a video of them. There's like a lot of Palestinian workers that come in and out of Israel every day. And there's a Palestinian worker who was sick and like coughing, and they just threw him on the side of the road, and then he collapsed and had to go to the hospital. They don't they don't give a shit. They don't give a shit. So it's a really scary situation. I can't predict what's going to happen, but based on how this virus affects humans in every single nation, I think what you're going to see in places like Gaza and Yemen and other places that have weak to no healthcare infrastructure because they're either war zones or de-developed countries, is you're going to see a higher mortality rate. Whereas in the West, it's like, depending on where and what age group, it's hovering between like less than 1% in a place like Germany to up to 4% in a place like Wuhan. I think it was like almost 4%, which is a scary number, by the way. That's a scary number, and that's a place with infrastructure. So if you take that and you consider the amount of people that actually survive because they're given ventilators, those people in Gaza won't survive because they're not going to have access to ventilators. They're not going to have access to the anti-malaria drug that's being used to help some people. They're not going to have access to oxygen. Not everybody's going to get the oxygen they need. So in places like Gaza, Yemen, Afghanistan, Syria, you're going to see, unfortunately and scarily, a really high mortality rate. And actually, Mike Davis, who's written a bunch of books, recently wrote an article that was really good for Jacobin, talking about that issue specifically in the article and comparing it to the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu in 1918, which I shouldn't even call it the Spanish flu. It was the it was the 1918 flu.
Yeah.
The 1918 flu killed like up to 50 million people, maybe more, around the world, had a mortality rate of 2 to 3% worldwide. But actually in places like India and Iran, which were dealing with British occupation, British Empire, stealing their resources, being developed, having mass malnutrition as a result, places like India and Iran, it was as high as 15% because people just were sicker. Their immune systems were compromised because they were living in a sick environment where, they were dealing with malnutrition or they were dealing with other ailments, even young people. So I think that's what you're going to see. I've probably been ranting about this for too long, but it's scary. It's really scary. But that's what you're going to see in a lot of these countries.
Yeah, and just so I can get this in here, the World Health Organization actually did issue a statement about Yemen saying that they have not seen cases of the coronavirus yet, but they're taking steps to try and set up some kind of a quarantine facility in the city of Aden. They want to be prepared. I mean, they have a chance to get ahead of this. People who are involved in relief could really do important work here, because once it gets there, because of the devastation from the Saudi and the United States bombing, the famine, already survived a cholera epidemic in the past couple of years, or probably it could still be there. The infrastructure has been destroyed in many parts of Yemen. So we know just how susceptible they would be to the spread of the coronavirus, because it says here that they lack access to clean water and soap, and that's an immediate sign that they would be vulnerable to the spread of this. This is a great question. It's a really good question to get in here. So I'm glad.
There's 70 million. There's 70 million refugees crammed into camps around the world. This is a disaster for those populations. I wish I had something nicer to say, but this is going to be a disaster for those populations, for all the reasons Kevin just mentioned. Kevin, I think I maybe lost you. You there?
Let's see if I can back. I think we're back. Sorry about that.
Yes.
Little glitch in the internet there. Rania, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Rania, can you hear me?
Yes. Hello.
I have to
Hello.
go out
I'm
and
here.
come back
I'm
in
here.
to wrap this up.
I'm here.
Rania, are you still?
I am. I'm here.
Oh, we were doing so good.
I'm here, Kevin. I'm
Rania,
here. Can you hear me?
Where are you?
Technical difficulties.
Uh-oh. Rania?
Yes, I'm
You
here.
there?
Yes. I don't know what to do. I'm here, Kevin. I'm here.
Man.
What do we do? I don't know if you
Oh, man.
sucks. I'm here.
Well, I no longer can hear Rania, but I'll keep on muddling through and just say
Did I mute?
that
No.
we've got this comment here, and I'm flying a little blind, but I'm going to read this from Ian. This was his rant that he had to share about Congress, which was, fuck Congress and the corporate class for treating themselves to trillions in free money and leaving everyone else with a $1,200 payment that comes in July and $600 extra in unemployment. Is that extra $600 going to prevent people from losing their apartment and their health insurance? Cobra is expensive as fuck. In the middle of a pandemic health crisis, millions are losing their jobs and access to healthcare. Nurses and doctors are basically being sacrificed with no protective gear, and Congress decides to give Wall Street trillions with no strings attached. My friend who works in the ER in Seattle says they have no personal protective equipment and are barred from making their own. The 0.1% are using the virus as a weapon against the rest of the population to expand their wealth and control. Fuck everyone who voted for this and everyone in the federal government who did jack shit to contain or mitigate the spread of this virus. I just don't see how this many mistakes could be anything other than policy, and to see that corporate free-for-all that largely abandons workers really cements it in my mind that this is the result of some deliberately cruel and sinister policy choices. Rania, I have apparently lost your feed, so why don't you go ahead since they can hear both of us. I apologize. I had a change to my internet happen today, and it has apparently made my Wi-Fi some of the worst possible internet to be trying to attempt a live stream tonight. Yeah. But we've only got like 10 or so minutes left. So what if you go ahead and respond to what Ian said, and when you're done, let me know on the private chat here, and I'll read the next comment that we have from patrons.
Okay. So sorry for all the technical difficulties, you guys. Thanks for bearing with us. I think that's a good way of putting it. I mean, it does feel like it is a result of deliberate policies. I mean, you have the greed of the wealthy in this country that has led to all of the policy failures that we're experiencing right now, from lack of capacity in hospitals to no medical protective equipment, to no health insurance, or people having to pay like $30,000 for coronavirus treatment, to no job security, everything, to the fact that we have homeless people who don't have anywhere to shelter and during shelter in place, to the fact that we have like all of these nursing homes that are understaffed and lack in sanitation, where this is spreading, and we're not even being told by federal officials in which nursing homes it's spreading, which is really, really scary. And I want to make a point about this is like the result of neoliberalism. They're so unprepared for a pandemic. And I think the best encapsulation of that is lack of hospital beds. For the past like 40 years, starting under Ronald Reagan, we have had this policy of trying to downsize hospitals. And it was ramped up, by the way, under Obama. Obama administration actually incentivized hospitals to get rid of beds and rid of services, like surplus services and equipment, which is the opposite of what you do to plan for a pandemic. You have all of these experts that have been warning, we're going to have a pandemic soon. We're going to have a pandemic soon. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. But neoliberalism is all about greed and cutting things so the rich can get richer. So one of the things they cut is hospital beds. So literally, like my brother-in-law is telling me at his hospital, they're already almost all the time at 90% capacity because the government, under a Democrat, incentivized hospitals to get rid of what they consider to be extra space that they don't need. It's a waste of resources to have equipment and beds you're not using. Okay? So now you have all these hospitals that on a typical day, in a typical month, they're already at 90% capacity. Hospitals get more money from the federal government for having fewer beds and fewer resources, which is crazy. And so now what do you do when you have this insane virus that's putting so many people in the hospital and in the ICU, not just like a hospital bed where they just need to be monitored, in the fucking ICU, you run out of beds very quickly. And you're seeing the result of that in New York City, where more hospitals were set to be shuttered, by the way, this year and next year, but they had to put that on hold. So I think that this is like all of these deliberate, sociopathic, heartless, cruel, capitalistic policies that have been put in place for the past several decades have led us to this moment where we're watching our country fail in every way imaginable. And even as it fails, the most powerful and wealthiest people are using it as an opportunity to transfer more wealth to themselves. And I think I need to tell Kevin I'm done because he can't hear me. I just messaged Kevin that I'm done ranting. Did he get it?
All right. Well, so, and just to explain to you, if I left and came back, we'd end the broadcast and we'd lose all of you, and the live stream wouldn't keep going. So, I appreciate Rania for ranting. It sounded like some A+ ranting, and I'll just show you. I have it up here on my phone, so it's working just fine here, and I'm really glad that you all are still enjoying. We've got a few more comments we'll squeeze in here as we are about to wrap, and there's a really good one here that we've got from. This one came here from Robert, and Robert said, "Hey guys, I just wanted to add to this great discussion. I am myself hypochondriac, and that was scary for a few days as I have allergies that can manifest as flu-like symptoms, and I wasn't sure if I had allergies or a beginning of flu or the coronavirus, but now I can say that I've never been so happy to have allergies." And then he left LMAO here. Anyways, the future is so uncertain that the present is what we should cherish the most. So the question I'm asking is, how do you see the future of the post-neoliberal Western world, which is an intensely philosophical question to ask, and one that we probably cannot tackle here in the last 5 to 10 minutes of the show adequately. But nonetheless, it's probably going to be the focus of a lot of our discussion about the coronavirus pandemic. And if I could just add one quick thought here before I pass it over to Rania to hit. I mean, I would say that, you know, we've sort of touched on some of this in the broadcast already, but the one thing that's clear is that the post-neoliberal Western world is not going to have the U.S., it's not going to have Europe as the leaders. We're going to see Asia. I mean, I take that question to almost have that in there implicitly. Implicitly, we are going to see countries that have more credibility and that are better leaders than us. It's going to mean tolerating a multipolar world. It's going to be quite a shock. Look at the pundit class, look at the political class, what they're going to have to deal with, recognizing that the US is not the center of the world, that we're not number one. I mean, they're definitely going to be going through some kind of shell shock. The meltdowns, once this becomes a reality that sets in and they're aware of what's happened, they may even surpass what it was like when they thought Bernie Sanders was going to be the next Democratic nominee. I don't know. I'm not sure what Rania has to say to that. But Rania, go ahead. This philosophical question of what the future of the post-neoliberal Western world might be. And then we'll mention a few comments here from people who have been watching, and we'll close.
Yeah, I agree with what Kevin said about the way things are going to go geopolitically, where you're going to have, I mean, I wouldn't bet that the U.S. is suddenly going to not be a powerful country, but it's certainly going to have lost a lot of credibility, and you're going to have a lot of countries that used to look to the U.S. looking towards countries like China. And I don't think that's necessarily a terrible thing, given that the U.S. is like this sociopathic capitalist empire that just destroys from both without and within. Internally in the U.S., though, I'm not quite sure. That is a philosophical question that requires, I think, a little bit more thought and debate. But it could go either way. I think there is an opportunity to, from the ground level, move in a progressive direction. We have a lot of limits right now, though, because it's actually really hard to organize when you can't meet in person. It's actually a really difficult thing to do. There's also a chance it could go in the other direction. And this is where my sort of pessimistic attitude comes in. And anybody who's a regular listener of the show knows that I'm typically the pessimistic person of the two of us. It could also go in the other direction, where, like I mentioned earlier, you have this like societal breakdown in a country awash with guns. And you have a rise in fascist groups. That could happen too. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope the progressive side wins out. You know, and the third scenario is the capitalist class, the neoliberalism, all of that shit becomes more entrenched and gets worse. And the status quo sort of remains as it is. I don't know how realistic that is. We have to wait and see. I'm rooting for the progressive side. And I actually think, I think that's a great question. And I think that me and Kevin, I'll tell him this when he can hear me, should maybe think about a political scientist or somebody who knows more about this kind of stuff to come on and actually talk about it in a philosophical sense, in a real sense, and like talk about the different ways things could go. I'd actually like to hear that. So we'll come back to that question. I guess I'll let Kevin know I'm done. So funny. There we go.
Yeah. So a few comments here that jumped out as we're wrapping, and I apologize for the awkwardness here, but this is absolutely the right way to handle it without totally blowing up this show. It's been so great to speak with all of you and do this, and it'll be great the next time that we do this because I won't have this glitch. But Kenneth said America is not the richest country in the world. It has the richest ruling class in the world. It's a big difference.
That's a good point.
I think that's a fair distinction when you look at how we're handling. I mean, how do you define rich? It's not very rich if we don't take care of the most vulnerable and like the poorest among us. The other thing I'll add that jumped out at me that I thought was worth mentioning is Mr. K noted that the lockdown was causing clean air across the planet. It turns out that Milan, northern Italy, and Wuhan, China, were air pollution hotspots. Where I live, there's the first sunshine in a year, no rain. I think that's important. We've seen that actually shutting down all around the world has probably curtailed our emissions significantly. And I'll read a couple more, and then Rania can react to the climate change aspect of this, the climate emergency part of this. We've got some really good. Mike said, I'm terrified for my 70-year-old mother who has severe asthma. And I completely empathize with you, Mike, because that is terrible. Anybody with any conditions like that, I would be terrified to know. So, yeah, I mean, I want to thank everyone for following. Do you have anything to say here before we were to close, Rania? I mean, it's been so great to speak to all of you.
Yeah, so about the climate change aspect of it, I'm sure all of us have noticed this, that stopping human activity, sadly, has had the impact of making the air cleaner. What's wrong, Kevin? What? Uh-oh. Okay, I'm going to keep talking and just pretend he didn't do that. And yeah, it does it does seem disturbing to me. It's like humans are so bad for the earth. But at the same time, lesson and maybe apply them after it's over. Like the air is cleaner. Maybe we should consider living in a different way. And to the person who mentioned that they're scared for their 7-year-old grandmother who's sick, I think this is something that a lot of us can relate to. Like my dad is in his late 70s and he's got all kinds of ailments, like a lot of people in their late 70s do. My mom is in her late 60s and she's got hypertension. And that's terrifying. So my parents are 20 minutes away from me. And I haven't seen them since I got back to the US because I don't want to infect them if I have it. It's a terrible situation that we're living in where we literally have to distance ourselves from the people we love to protect them. But it's for the best. Like if you have somebody who's unhealthy and they need to stay home, you need to make sure that you beg them to stay home and don't go see them if you're somebody who moves around because you might have it and give it to them. But yeah, it's a scary situation. I think we're all in the same boat. And I'm really, really disturbed by and sick of the mentality that, oh, it's no big deal if old people die. It is a big deal. Those are our parents and grandparents. I don't want them to die. I want them to live. And I don't care if it means the economy crashes. So I'm with you, dude. I'm with you fearing things about what's to come for our loved ones. And I can only say like the best thing we can do is do what we can control. And the things we can control are who we see, who we interact with, and things like washing your hands and not touching your face and trying to limit your interactions with other people, especially older people, in case you have it, is the best we can do. And on that note, I'm going to tell Kevin. And he's like typing away. And so what a funny way to do a show. Where our listeners can see and hear us, but one of us can't see and hear the other person.
I'm going to end the broadcast here. Thanks, everybody.